as I thought about the wall, the leading with love wall, our next guest would be on that wall with a big old picture. Because when I came into contact with his story, I was so inspired. I said, this is it. He represents what my father was talking about and fighting for in terms of a livable wage in the last stages of my father's life. I keep saying it again, but near the latter part, before they took him from us, I have to keep saying that, he called for a poor people's campaign. And at that point, he was talking about livable wages. The best way to end poverty, he said, is basically a guaranteed annual income. And it had to be pegged to inflation so people could, live reasonably. And so this gentleman has an incredible story that we all need to hear about. And those in the corporate community need to take heed. So this is the segment about leading with love, corporate responsibility. And our guest for this segment is the CEO of Gravity Payments, Dan Price. I am so happy to have Dan with us this morning. Dan, you're such an inspiration. I just have to tell you that. I love you. I appreciate you. The world needs more of you. And so we want to hear about your story. I think that's the most important thing because a lot of people don't know it. I know you've been on a lot of within a lot of news outlets sharing your story, but we want more and more people to hear about it across the globe because we've got to shift the economic paradigm in our world. So if you would just start us from the beginning, because in a time when many are fighting to raise the minimum wage, what inspired you to raise the minimum salary for Gravity employees? Is that $70,000?
$70,000, Dr. King, and thank you so much. That is so generous of you, and thanks for having me, Dr. Graves, as well. I have to say, so just to catch people up to speed a little bit, if people have heard of me, it's probably because they heard about how in 2015 I lowered my pay by $1 million so that we could pay everyone at my company, Gravity Payments, a minimum of $70,000 per year. So what that meant is the lowest, roughly third of our employees at Gravity Payments had their pay doubled. And our pay band in terms of the top pay to the bottom pay got squeezed because it used to go from 30 or 35,000 to $1 million. And now the very bottom is 70,000 and the top's about 300,000. So, and also we've had raises since then. Our median salary now at Gravity Payments is $100,000 a year, but the effects have just been incredible. We have had our employees just thrive. They went from having between 0 and 2 babies born per year. People like to say, those of us in my generation, millennials, don't want to have kids. It's not true because as soon as people made money, we went from having 0 to 2 babies born per year to 60 in the last 6 years total over that period of time. We also had people buy homes. First-time home ownership skyrocketed 10 times what it had been before. And everyone says, if you give money to regular people, they won't use it well, and it's completely wrong. And we proved it because people pay down debt. 70% of the employees paid down debt. A third of the employees became completely debt-free. And people between doubled and tripled what they were saving for retirement. But then, everyone wants to come after me and say, well, what about the business results? And the business results were fantastic too. In fact, we were able to cut in half our employee turnover. So we keep our employees around twice as long. That saves us so much money in terms of training and all that, lost knowledge that you lose when people leave your organization. And it showed up in our numbers. So we were able to triple our revenue that we process for 20,000 small businesses all over the United States. We're able to triple that in that 5-6 year period since we announced that raise. So this absolutely works. But what was also unfortunate is that, and this won't be a shocker to either of you, that corporate America really didn't follow suit in spite of the fact that we proved that it works, in spite of the fact that we're not just some, single example, because Costco pays people a living wage versus Sam's Club that doesn't. McDonald's pays a very low wage. We have a burger chain called Dick's here in Seattle that pays a much more livable wage. In-N-Out Burger pays a much more livable wage. And those companies that do that, they tend to perform better. But yet, corporate America just seems sort of hell-bent on squeezing workers, squeezing people, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. So, we're seeing the success inside of our organization, and we're proving that this works, but yet we're not really seeing it translate to corporate America.
I want to ask you a question before Kalisha jumps in, because I also read how you weathered the pandemic. If I'm not mistaken, you didn't lose any workers, and you all had to cut back. Tell that story was just like incredible to know what your example inspired with your employees during that pandemic and how you all recovered.
Well, it was the most humbling year of my life, Dr. King, because we lost 55% of our revenue when the pandemic hit. And we had a matter of a couple months, before we were going to be out of business. But what happened was that our employees all got together and they said, hey, we want to save this company, and they said, let's do on an individual anonymous basis, we will offer temporary pay cuts to get us through the pandemic. But they wanted it to be individual and anonymous because some of the people were experiencing individual problems with the pandemic, where they had spouses or partners being laid off, or they had, elderly parents that needed extra support and all these things. So we didn't want there to be any pressure. The employees didn't want there to be any pressure. So it was all individual, but yet 98% of the employees on an anonymous basis asked for their pay to be cut. And I think it exemplifies, something that's true, which is CEOs aren't the ones that save companies. Employees saves companies. Anybody that's worked at a company knows that, as long as they weren't the CEO. We all know that. And it's not the CEOs that create value in companies. It's not the higher ups. It's the workers that create it. And so this just, proved it, because again, what you had in contrast in corporate America was you had corporate America cutting jobs. You had corporate America taking government bailout money, giving extra bonuses. CEO pay grew more during the pandemic than it had in the previous years. And you had shareholders, that see their value skyrocket at the same time that the workers were being squeezed. And, if that wasn't maddening enough, you had so much doublespeak from these corporations, calling people essential heroes. And then, as soon as they can get away with it, changing the page and saying, no, service workers aren't essential heroes. They're untrained, unskilled workers, which is complete BS. And the pandemic showed that. Or corporate America, saying things like with Amazon in Seattle saying Black Lives Matter, and then busting a union of people with a lot of Black folks who are just trying to get a living wage, where their life actually can matter economically and have that freedom to go out there and make their own choices and have freedom, have autonomy. So Dr. King, I completely agree with you. It really comes down to everybody needs a livable wage. Everybody needs a universal basic income. Your father was right about that. And we all need to rally around that, because we've proven, and it's been proven over and over again, just how well that works for all of us.
But your leading with love, I would dare say, infected your employees, because had you not done what you did, I'm not sure your employees would have made that commitment. So I don't want to minimize that. I know you can't say anything about that, but I'm going to say, I believe you set an incredible example for them.
Let me just say, though, I think it says more about how low the standards are for somebody like me. Because if you think about what I did, just recognizing very basic facts and acting accordingly, I believe that it's something that most of our nice 10-year-old kids out there in the world would do. But the problem is the system trains people to be so greedy. And so it makes the bar for somebody like me so low, where you have somebody who, frankly, just does what should be considered the bare minimum, which is what I did. And yet it's considered such a great example because of how low the bar is and how poor, corporate America has behaved for so long.
And what I didn't hear is what pushed you to do it.
So there were a couple different things that all happened. So there was a woman that works at Gravity Payments. She's been there, I think, 6 years. Her name's 16 years. Her name's Rosita Barlow. And she was such a hard worker. She was like MVP of the company. And I found out she was moonlighting at McDonald's to be able to afford to make ends meet. So initially I was like, okay, we got to fix that. We got to pay Rosita, closer to what she's worth so she doesn't have to be moonlighting. But we just did it for her, which was not the right solution. Then it came up again with another employee. And I was like, okay, we need to start having a concerted effort to make wages better across the board. But we were kind of going 15, 20% per year and making progress incrementally. But what tipped me over the edge and said, I'm not playing these games anymore. We're starting at $70,000 minimum and no one's going to make less than that, is I was on a hike with a friend and she was explaining to me how a $200 rent increase was basically making her life completely unlivable. And, I was out of touch at the time because, tech CEOs are the most overpaid people in the history of humanity, especially in 2021. And so seeing the real life stress that this was causing for a friend of mine, just a $200 rent increase, how it was completely throwing her economic life and therefore the rest of her life into chaos. I just said, if I really believe in the people I'm working with, how can I be putting even one of them in that situation? And so, I just realized that if we can afford to do this and we don't do it, that would be a real stain on the history of the company.
Wow. What you've done, Dan, is really to implement a human-centered design in terms of economics, and really how you mentioned about how your employees came together to save the company really speaks to the culture that you've created. Now, for those of us who dabble in statistics, we know that correlation is not causation. But I did want to ask you, from a human capital standpoint, what have been the ripple effects, if you will, the ripple enhancements, if you will, that you've observed among your team?
Well, the number one is that people are less stressed and they have less distraction, because when you are living under the constant economic stress and pressure of, am I going to make it? That is very distracting. Specifically, also, people were able to cut down their commute times because, people couldn't afford to live close to where the office was. And of course, since the pandemic, we've been remote, and we're going to continue to be remote as long as employees want to be remote. But cutting down those commute times, getting people in a place where they could kind of go to work and just have their life be more livable from a time management standpoint. We had 2 people lose over 100 pounds because of that, because they went from commuting to exercising. They went from being sort of under pressure all the time and under stress to feeling relaxed. So it really increased people's capability. Everyone wants to talk about motivation because we have this obsession thinking people aren't motivated enough. I got news for you. People are plenty motivated. It's just that we have not invested in their capability by giving them the right amount of money for what what they deserve. So it was really that. And then secondarily, in addition to improving people's capability, it impacted their license, their sense of kind of how they fit into the organization. Because if you're being paid a living wage, then you have an intuitive sense that your voice matters and what you do matters. And that does create, I wouldn't say it creates a sense of responsibility, but I'd say it doesn't steal it away from people either. And this is where I really feel strongly that I do get too much credit. I think the type of thing that the employees did at Gravity Payments that you're talking about, and all these beautiful things that we see, I think it's inside of each of us. And I think I think your father, Dr. King, taught that, and I believe that goodness is inside of us. But I believe that the systems and the structures of capitalism rip that away from us, take it away from us. So it's not like we are leading our employees to have these things. It's more like we're trying to do a better job of not taking away what was already there.
That's critical. And really what I hear you saying, you talked about how it comes from the inside of us, is that it's not about hammering down culture, but rather allowing it to kind of breed organically, right? Mm-hmm. So the next question is, how do we get other corporations. What advice would you have for how we could get other corporations to move in the direction you've pursued?
Well, Dr. Graves, I grew up in a conservative Christian family that was all about obsessed with business and business first and service to corporations. And that's just how I was raised. So I kind of drank all that Kool-Aid, and I thought if we implement this program and prove that it can work, then everybody's going to follow suit. We get a few other examples and businesses, and then, no one's accused me of being quiet about it because I'm out here shouting from the rooftops about it. But what I realized was that's not going to work because that system of greed is so resilient. The only way it can truly work is through systemic reform, systemic change. Ultimately, we have to pass laws that make this sort of thing happen. And, we do have some models from different parts of the world and even some parts of our history in the United States, because there were periods of time where we had, a healthy tax rate that rich people had to pay, more like 50% effective tax rate plus. We had wages that we could grow, double in a 10 or 15 year period. We have precedent and a model for how to do these things. Of course, we didn't do them in the right way before because it was only for a very select privileged portion of the population. But we can take that model and we can basically apply that to the entire population of our country and learn those lessons from the world. So it's getting fair tax rates, having the government be for the people instead of for the corporations and the wealthy, having things like universal basic income, Medicare medical coverage for everybody. It's just the basics that we all need to work. Having free education for people. I mean, it's crazy that we don't have free education because free education pays for itself many times over. So it's just making these basic investments. And the last thing I'll say is having a real commitment to full employment and giving workers some amount of leverage. Workers have maybe just a tiny bit of leverage right now for the first time in a very long time. Workers should always have leverage. So we should have unions. We should have whatever we can to support workers in that struggle because corporations are always going to try to squeeze them down.
So there is obviously a fear to move in this direction. And I can imagine when you were getting ready to make the decision, you probably experienced some fear. What helped you to move past that? Was it because of those roots that you had connected to this being a person that you loved or love, meaning your friend? Because I think that's a real thing we have to consider. Some of it is, yes, people, this greed mentality just really drives a lot of people. But I can imagine some CEOs are just afraid,
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, Dr. King. And I believe that, I believe deep down that if I didn't do it, that would be wrong. But it's like, where did that come from? And that did help me overcome that fear, because you're right, there was some fear involved. But I think what helped me to get through that was just being in touch with people. I think that, there is a way that when you become successful and become rich or maybe people think you're going to, they sort of, put their arm around you and kind of explain to you, this is how the world really works and you need to follow and play by these rules, or you're not really going to get along with people going forward. And so I had a period of time where, I was influenced by that. But I think just being in touch with, with people that were not part of that exclusive club, that didn't have that, negative thing, I think that really helped me to stay on track when I needed to do the right thing.
Did you have any, were you in this alone? Did you have any support systems?
I would say my employees really were the ones, because when I did announce the decision, I was expecting it to be all good news, but actually a huge part of the media came out against me. So Rush Limbaugh derided me as a socialist and said my company would be a case study in MBA programs of how to tank a good company. And then Fox News said that my employees were going to be on the breadlines because of my selfish decision. And so, a lot of viewers of those organizations, really were concerned and saying, like, we don't want to support this. And so that really allowed us to rally around each other, and our employees come from every different, background politically and in every way. And so, we're able to rally around each other and just stick together. So I would say that the real credit for the success of this and the fact that I implemented it should go to people like Rosita Barlow and other people at Gravity that basically have kept me on track and kept me accountable and been honest with me when they needed to take a risk to do it. So I'd say that's really where the credit should go.
So if you had an opportunity today, and maybe this has already happened and you can just share about it, but had an opportunity to sit in the room with these CEOs, what 2 practical steps would you share with them that they can take to really allow love to lead the way and create corporations where there's a sense of belongingness, and also where issues of inequity are addressed? So this is your chance. You're in the room with, some of the Fortune 500 corporate CEOs.
Well, before I get in the room, I'll whisper to you that they're not going to listen to me. But if I had the chance anyway, it's pretty simple. Put your workers first. Put their pay specifically first. Don't come at them with a bunch of perks and pizza parties and this and that. Real money that they can take home and have their own autonomy, their own decision making on that. And also make the working conditions and the hours healthy. Do what's going to be healthy for your employees. But every business, no matter how big or small, can understand that if they have employees that are not making a living wage, that's a problem. It's not that hard to figure that out. Then it's like, okay, that's a problem. What do we do about it? Let's make that the top priority. And instead of thinking about shareholder buybacks or CEO compensation or any other of these sort of schemes of like buying other companies to try to create monopolies, put your workers, put their pay number one. And even if you truly believe, which I probably wouldn't agree with, that you can't afford to pay all your workers $70,000 a year or a living wage, you can at a minimum stand in front of your workers and say, this is important, this is a priority, we have to get there, and set an aggressive growth target. Before we implemented the $70,000 minimum wage in 2012, 13, and 14, we averaged between 15 and 20% annual raises for our team. And that was because I stood in front of the entire company and said, this is a goal. We need 15+% raises. We need to do better when it comes to wages. So any CEO in 2021 that's not standing in front of their employees and saying that, they're not doing their job ultimately. And I think we just need to call it like it is.
So what about the workers? Because, and I don't like, I know we use this language. That's always my struggle when we're talking about be loved, the proper language. And we all have to learn a new language. But those who are part of the corporate family, who help the corporate move and work, what is your challenge to that group of people? Because you said really all the credit goes to those who work within your company. The Gravity family, they really have made the difference. What can people who are out there now who are working in all these different corporate environments, whether it be small business or the larger corporate settings, what can they do to begin to charge up the environment so that some of this stuff we're talking about can begin to happen? Because you're right, there's a lot of people power. We don't know it yet. A lot of us still don't recognize that we, the people, still have a lot of influence, and we just have to know how to collectively utilize it.
Yeah, it's tough because these issues are systemic, right? And so trying to say, like, how can this individual solve this systemic problem? It's really tricky. But what I think we need when it's systemic is solidarity. And we need to be together with that solidarity. But you might say, well, how does that look in practical terms? It might look like taking more time off, working a little bit less, not, kind of neglecting other things in your life in service for a corporation, trying to spend a little bit more time with your family and those things when you can, and doing it in solidarity. Because right now, for the first time, if you believe the pundits, which I generally don't, workers have just a little bit of leverage. So ask for that raise, get that raise, and then talk to each other. We need to share what each other's salaries are, even though we were taught, through corporations, don't share that. That's rude to do. We need to be transparent about, what do I make? What do you make? So that we can have more information to work against and negotiate against those corporations. And we need to ultimately not look at this as like, I want the corporation I work for to do better than the corporation you work for, but instead, how do we work together as people in solidarity and recognize that probably the bigger game here is the people versus all the corporations, as opposed to making sure my corporation beats yours in this, an unending game for greed.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing your story. And you're inspiring me. I've been agonizing at the King Center, which is on the nonprofit side, making it a little bit more challenging because we depend on, grants and people donating. So it's a little more scary, but I tend to operate in faith. And one of the things recently I've been looking at is how do I ensure that no one who is working for us in our nonprofit, whether it be part-time or full-time, does not have the opportunity to have full health coverage. And you've just inspired me to think about looking at it in a different kind of way, because it really troubles me that we have commercialized health and politicized it. If we're talking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in this nation, we can have neither of those if our health is compromised. And so thank you for your work. We will work in solidarity so that we can continue to move this nation and world in the right direction, so that, as my father said, we make the major shift from being thing-oriented to person-centered. That's what he said to us in '67. And where do we go from here? Chaos of community. We must rapidly, he said, begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-centered society. And if we had just done that, wow, we would be in a much better place. So again, thank you so much for sharing this.
For me too. Thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you for the conversation, Dr. Graves as well, and Dr. King, and hope to meet you all in person sometime. But thank you so much for including me in this, and thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, and we will see you again.
Sounds
definitely.
Great. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Wow. Yeah, that
I had to hold back tears.
Yeah, that was rich. That was rich. It's something, when you come from a human-centered perspective, so much of the language that Dan used was not about extraction. Our notions of capitalism, the ordering logic that guides capitalism, is a lot of times about extraction, how much you can get out of people.
Yes.
Quickly you can get it out of them. But what Dan's language is about investing in people so that they can contribute at maximum. That's a fundamentally different paradigm. Yeah. So that was powerful.
Yeah, it's very powerful. And he's so humble, Yeah. It's just like I can't take the credit. Definitely. And I definitely hear where he's coming from, but we all know that how you lead is important. And because things trickle down. And so, I just, my hope and prayer is that those who are in these various communities leading in these 500, 100, Fortune 500, 100, 1,000, 5,000, whatever worlds, I hope this message gets out to them because he's already proven, the naysayers wrong. Prove Rush Limbaugh wrong. Yeah. During the pandemic, the workers said anonymously, we will take a pay cut.
Right.
98%. Reminds me of the bus protest where 99% stayed off the buses. So 98%. And then what he didn't share with us, which I read in the story, is that they were able to recoup some of that money afterwards. I mean, we're still kind of in the pandemic, but even though they gave it up, it came back. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, that is just so powerful. It's the fear of letting go that we're going to lose something instead of gain something. And he had everything to lose, and yet he gained.
That's right.
And so many, not just materially,
mm-hmm.
as he indicated.
Yeah, it's not a question of can we do it. It's will we do it.
Exactly.
So it's just a matter of will.
Dr. West always tweets out, we got to build the will. We got to build the will.
Yes.
My father talked about it. We have the resources. They're right here in the United States of America and across the world. We have all the resources we need. I preached a sermon and told people that God put everything here on this universe that we need, and money has not evaporated.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all here. We just have to build the will to do what's right, to make sure that we are equitably sharing in the resources. It doesn't mean everybody has to be a millionaire, but people should be able to have these livable wages and not have to struggle with, do I pay the rent, buy the medicine, pay the light bill, cut back on groceries. These are basic fundamental things. Now, if you're talking about, do I get a second car? Do I buy some, because I love jewelry. Do I buy some more jewelry? Do I get another pair of shoes? That's a whole different thing.
Yeah, that's my problem. Shoes and bags. That's my problem.
Yeah, well, my problem is shoes. I have boxes coming to my house almost every day. It's gotten a little better. But anyway.
It's something key you said there, Dr. King. You said we have to build the will. When we think about build, that's going to require a habit change. Yes. That's going to require a lifestyle change. So I just wanted to point that out. When you talk about build the will, that's about habit. They say it's quick to adopt a habit, but it takes longer to break a habit. So that's why, again, this Be Love platform as a paradigm shift is critical, because faith comes by hearing. So the more that people hear this, the more we put it out into the atmosphere, we can literally shape the contours and shift paradigms.
Yeah, and we want people to develop a new habit in a new way. We have to, because we are headed in a very dangerous direction, I think, as a world. And so I'm just so grateful for all of the guests we had this morning. It's been rich.
Oh, yes.
From men to why am I forgetting his name? Jose, to Ashley, to Dan, to Kim and Zoe. I mean, we are touching the world with these conversations around immigration and around economic justice, and around how do we reach this next generation to corporate responsibility. Because, I remember years ago, I was having a conversation with my mom, and I was telling her, during the time period that you all were struggling for, freedom and justice and equality, it was really about government responsibility. And I am not saying that there's still not a responsibility that government has, but I believe, this is what I told her, I said, I believe we have entered into the age of corporate social responsibility. And I was having this conversation with her around the year 2000, because we have allowed corporations to kind of skate out of having any responsibility to society. Just, basically, have consumers, give us, enrich us, with no responsibility and accountability back to humanity, back to human life, and back to communities proportionately. So I'm glad that we have people like Dan stepping up to the plate, and there are some corporate leaders who are beginning to try. So we're not bashing any corporate leaders. What we're doing is calling you up to a higher place of responsibility to ensure that the life that you live, in terms of being able to have just the basics that everybody that works in your corporate family can have as well. So I'm glad we're having this discussion. We'll keep having it. We'll keep highlighting people even more. And I want to remind people that this is Be Love Day. Everything you're hearing today is about coming from a place of love to address these issues. We're talking about some tough things. It took a lot of love and strength and care and compassion for those that work in his corporation, for Dan to make that decision. It takes love for what Ashley is on a mission to do in terms of helping to further capitalize Black banks and further educate people, on these disparities that exist, for Jose and for men, the work that they do, and him being in a position as an undocumented person, but yet having the strength and the courage to be able to continue to speak these important truths and to represent things that are so important in this world.